Hello comrades, welcome to the Ruslan Belov channel. In today's episode, we will examine the situation on the Ukrainian theatre of military operations as of December 3rd, 2025. A number of significant events were recorded over the past day, so let's begin our analysis. So we proceed directly to the frontline situation and analyze the changes that occurred compared to the previous day. Our review will begin with the Zaporizhzhia sector, where RF forces are intensifying offensive operations, likely already with an eye on the city of Zaporizhzhia itself. Over the current day, a significant volume of various clarifications and markings in the area of the village of Stepnogorsk was recorded. On this section, apparently, a breakthrough of Ukrainian defensive lines was recorded, and at the moment, Ukrainian military personnel found themselves trapped on the territory of the Stepnogorsk citadel. Pay attention to the changes in the cartographic situation over recent days. RF forces have already completely blockaded Stepnogorsk, which was also confirmed by the head of the General Staff of the RF Armed Forces. There is a significant probability that in the very near future, Ukrainian troops will likely attempt to break through to the north with fighting, although exit from Stepnogorsk in the direction of Veselyanka is already practically impossible. The terrain here consists of continuous fields and open space, which makes a breakthrough extremely difficult. A more reasonable decision will most likely be capitulation. But let's see how the situation develops. Considering the fact that some cartographic resources have already made changes to the map beyond the boundaries of Stepnogorsk, and a certain direction of movement is visible, we can now confidently state that Russian troops, after the final clearing of Stepnogorsk, will head toward the village of Lukyanivske, as well as to this system of fortifications. Pay attention to the number of dug trenches, ditches, dugouts in this territory. It is precisely in this direction that Russian forces will now move in order to subsequently advance to the east, to the settlement of Orikhiv, or more precisely, to strike Orikhiv from the northwestern direction. Next, we move to the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction, from where information is also coming from the area of the village of Huliai Pole. Over the current day, the map has again undergone significant changes, and we observe that the Vostok grouping, or more precisely the speed of advancement of the Vostok grouping, continues to increase. The map has changed so substantially that it's difficult to determine from which moment to start counting, to understand the chronology of corrections. Let's start from November 29th. We see that on November 29th, the map did not undergo changes. This is how the map was corrected over the last 4 to 5 days. Russian troops actively advanced in the direction of Dobropilya, Varvarivka, and now today, data is already coming in about the complete clearing of all settlements east of Huliai. We're talking about the settlements of Zeleny High and Chervone. As for Chervone, this information received confirmation from the RF Ministry of Defense, and video material was also published on which one can observe the process of combat operations for this small village located east of Huliai. On these frames, strikes by Sontsepiok systems, aviation strikes are recorded, and of course, Russian flags that were raised in different parts of this small village. Based on the Ministry of Defense report, this video material, as well as reports from various analysts, we made a complete correction in the Chervone area. Russian troops are actively advancing further in the direction of the settlement of Huliai, and at the present moment, units of the Russian army approach closely to Highway R85 to the village of Varvarivka. Pay attention to the changes on the map, and today we can already state that the distance between the forward positions of Russian troops and the village of Varvarivka is less than 2 kilometers. Already tomorrow, or possibly during the current night, combat operations for this village will begin. However, before continuing, I would like to remind you once again and draw your attention to the video that was published yesterday by the Vostok troops, grouping about the battles for the village of Dobropilya. Let's review once again the key frames that need to be clearly understood. On these frames, in the first seconds, the flight of a Russian UAV is visible, and here Russian FPV drone operators show us the defensive line. That is, these are the initial frames. Usually video materials about the clearing of one or another settlement in the Zaporizhzhia direction always begin with strikes by FABs or Sontsepiok's. But these frames begin precisely with analysis and demonstration of defensive and engineering structures of the AFU on this section. So the initial seconds of frames are not those territories that Russian troops managed to clear in battles for Dobropilya. No, this is the line that runs somewhat west of the Haichul River. You see on my map there is such a yellow and red line. Here are the fortifications. What we saw in the initial seconds is precisely that line of defense that we have repeatedly discussed. It is very seriously fortified. Significant AFU forces are now concentrating here with the goal of preventing the advancement of Russian units further to the west. And it is precisely on this line of defense that the Ukrainian command, as well as Zelensky himself, hopes. And they perfectly understand there that if Russian troops manage to break through this line of defense, which we can see once again on these frames, then from this moment it will be possible to officially speak about the beginning of combat operations for the city of Zaporizhzhia, because it will only be a matter of time when Russian troops manage to approach. But according to our approximate calculations, possibly within 5 months at minimum, the Russian army will be able to reach such a line when full evacuation of the city and Zaporizhzhia agglomeration will already be announced. Over the current day, the Russian army cleared Chervona, advanced to Varvarivka, and of course, Russian units continue to concentrate toward the northeastern and northern part of Huliai-Pol. More and more video materials are coming from this settlement and from this direction. Here are curious frames that were recorded by a Russian FPV drone operator who was conducting reconnaissance in one of the directions. The importance and interest of these frames lies in the fact that here we see, seemingly, an ordinary roof. And what's interesting about this roof? But in reality, this is not just a roof. This is an entire airfield for a unit, for one of the FPV drone operator units. Pay attention, just on this frame, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is what I managed to count. 7 drones are located on the roof and are waiting for their turn for takeoff and strike and flight in the direction of either Ukrainian or Russian positions. Possibly this is, let's say, a launch pad for operators of either the Ukrainian or Russian side. It's difficult to say. I won't rush to conclusions yet. That is, extremely important frames that demonstrate to us in general how the nature of combat operations is now transforming, how the approach is changing in general. Today here is one such airfield, one operator who launches these drones in sequence and only changes, and someone else on the roof essentially changes their batteries or in some other way to replace, prepare, and the next drone flew off. That is, such frames are coming precisely from the Zaporizhzhia direction. That is, this demonstrates to us in general that intensity of combat operations and those difficulties that Russian units face. By the way, also literally all these days, a new plan of individual Ukrainian commanders is being discussed, the essence of which consists of maximally saturating the front line with FPV drone operators, as well as a huge number of these drones, so that what we could just observe on the roof would occur along the entire front line. And the Ukrainian command believes that this may allow slowing down the offensive and advancement of Russian troops. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk section of the front. Over the current day, small corrections are coming from here, more and more information about Myrnohrad. I remind you that according to the latest data, approximately 2,000 Ukrainian servicemen are blocked on the territory of Myrnohrad without any chance of breaking out of the encirclement. Russian troops regularly strike AFU positions with FABs, and we see that in reality, the situation here is very difficult. Over the current day, individual sources report a very high level of sanitary losses. To exit, to break out of the encirclement is impossible. And what's most curious is that for some reason, Ukrainian units from the territory of Myrnohrad, apparently, or at minimum, this is not openly reported, are not making contact to begin negotiations on capitulation issues. That is, for some reason they remain in Myrnohrad, and so far no decisions in this direction are being made. Possibly there are some threats, even including from the Ukrainian command. Also, for the second or third day in a row, Russian troops are actively attacking on the territory of the village of Hryshyn. This is, so to speak, already the first settlement in the Pokrovsk area located to the north. Well, we're not talking about Rodinska, we're speaking precisely about, so to say, the northwestern sector. Russian units are actively advancing, moving in the direction of the villages of Vasilivka, Novolexandrivka. Here, of course, the task is to reach operational space, which begins immediately beyond Hryshin, and already move into the depth of the Donetsk region, and also possibly with entry into the territory of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast as well. Also, Russian troops are actively attacking on the Dobropilya direction. Actually, the Ukrainian counteroffensive ended somewhere in mid or early November 2025, and from this moment, Russian troops, after a short regrouping, began to restore positions that were lost from August 2025 to mid-November 2025. Over the current day, information is already coming that Russian troops practically managed to completely restore control over the Novoshaktov-Sharkov road. Individual analysts state that Novoshaktov is already under control of Russian troops. Also, units of Russian troops are improving their positions along the railroad between Dorozhny, Zaporizhzhia, and Rodinske. Also, Russian units continue to storm the village of Sofiivka. Next, we move to the Siversk section of the front, from where probably the most important news of the outgoing day is coming. Over the current day, as you see, the map underwent substantial changes precisely south and southwest of the village of Siversk. And also from this section, as you see, a huge number of frames of FPV drone strikes on AFU positions were published. So what happened on this section over the outgoing day? The most important frames for the current day are coming from the territory of the village of Sviato-Pokrovsk. These frames were published by the Russian side, and on these frames we can clearly observe a Russian fighter who apparently is conducting clearing of some basement premises in the southeastern part of the village of Sviato-Pokrovsk. Perhaps he is offering Ukrainian soldiers to capitulate, perhaps he is conducting dialogue, perhaps he is trying to control the situation, but in general something is happening precisely in this area. This point, this building was successfully geolocated. Precisely in the area of this structure, the Russian fighter was offering, apparently, Ukrainian soldiers to capitulate. And these frames give us to understand, clearly give us to understand, that Russian troops are already actively advancing through Sviato-Pokrovsk itself. And based on these frames, as well as based on corrections of various cartographic resources, we made coloring in this area. And now we see that Siversk, the city of Siversk, has completely lost control over Highway T-0513. The most important supply artery was lost during the advancement of Russian units. Also, we see that the territory, that is, the fields between the southern branch and northern branch of Highway T-0513, are under complete fire control of the RF armed forces with the use of FPV drones, which indicates that AFU losses now on the territory of Siversk are maximally high. And most likely, the pace of offensive and clearing of Siversk will only increase with each day. On the Lyman direction, there is a small correction in the area of the village of Drobisheve. But before this, some cartographers, I remind you, yesterday made colorings based on video material published by the Ukrainian side, as a result of which, as a result of a counterattack, clearing of the village of Stavki occurred. And over the current day, according to various analysts, we are making a correction on the map, coloring the village of Stavki completely into a grey zone, because there are already publications about a counterattack. Although we believe that most likely this was a media counterattack, as in the Kupiansk area, so that Zelensky would have at least some strong cards possibly, at the negotiating table with Vitkov. However, the negotiations did not take place, therefore apparently, in the near future, Ukrainian troops will be retreating from Stavki in the direction of Lyman. Also, there is a correction already in the eastern part of the village of Drobisheve. We will not watch this video, as there is a large amount of violence here, but on the frames we could observe how Russian units are storming the eastern part of the village of Drobisheve and are advancing into the depth of the settlement. That is, we see that possibly combat operations for Drobisheve are entering some kind of final phase. Next, we move toward Vovchansk. Over the current day from this section, small corrections are also being published and coming. Here, Russian troops have already definitely gone beyond the city limits, beyond the boundary of the city of Vovchansk, and are now actively advancing through fields in the direction of the village of Bilyi Kolodyaz. Also, over the current day, information is already coming that Russian troops managed to clear at minimum 20% of the village of Vilcha, and Russian troops continue to move further in the southern direction. Based on current rates of offensive, one can conclude that the village of Vilcha in the near Future, like the village of Lyman, will pass under control of the RF armed forces, and this will already be actually reaching operational space and the beginning of movement in the direction of Bili Kolodiaz. And that's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, put your likes, and all the best to you.